With this mind map or balanced diet, let's try and remember everything that we know about it. Balanced diet is basically a diet that consists of adequate amounts and proportions of all the required nutrients needed for healthy growth and to maintain efficient daily functions and activities. So, in essence, a balanced diet means the right types of foods, right amount of foods or drinks in their correct proportions, and also nutrients in food um, in their right quantities that are enough or should be enough to support cells, tissues, and organs. What are the characteristics of a balanced diet? It's basically for optimal combination um, of nutrients. They have optimal combination of nutrients for health. And a balanced diet meets daily nutritional requirements, provides adequate um, energy for bodily functions, supports immune function, system functions, and maintains healthy body weight, and also disease prevention and management too. With the significance of balanced diet in supporting bodily functions, um, things that you have to notice that it helps in energy production, tissue repair, regulation or regulatory functions, immune support, digestive health, cardiovascular health, and even cognitive function too. When it comes to the nutritional objectives for a balanced diet, it's basically for healthy weight gain or weight loss and maintenance of body weight and also energy balance. Um, and other objectives include reduction in the intakes of simple sugars, elimination of unhealthy fats, saturated and trans fats from the diet, reduction in the intake of sodium as common salt, and increased consumption of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, and nuts, and adequate consumption of essential fatty acids. Also, adherence to food safety principles, adequate consumption of water, and decrease in consumption of artificial additives. Now let's recap macronutrients, and let's start with carbohydrates. It's a primary source of energy, and its recommended daily intake is 45 to 65% of the total calories. And there are several types. You have the simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, and dietary fibers. And the clinical significance of this is even in the management of diabetes and several conditions. With proteins, also a macronutrient, is essential for tissue repair and maintenance, and the recommended intake is from 10 to 35% of total calories. And we have the complete proteins and the incomplete proteins. Basically, with the complete proteins from animal sources and the incomplete from plant sources, and with the complete having both the essential and non-essential amino acids, and incomplete just the non-essential amino acids and few essential. So when it comes to protein in clinical application, it helps in wound healing, muscle maintenance, and also immune function. With fats also as macronutrients, um, it helps in hormone production and also of course energy storage. And this daily intake or recommended intake is 20 to 35% of total calories. And there are several types: saturated fats, unsaturated fats, and the trans fats. So all these fried foods, usually trans fats, and the saturated, unsaturated fatty. We have the monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are better than the saturated and the trans fats. Omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids too are very important. And there are cardiovascular health implications of excessive trans and saturated fats too intake. Now, with the micronutrients that should be part of balanced diet, And we have the fat soluble and the water soluble vitamins. And the fat soluble vitamins are vitamin A, D, E, and K. And the water soluble vitamins are the B complexes and C. So the daily recommended intakes are a bit specific to the type of vitamin, but then they are all required and very, very important. Water soluble vitamins are easily excreted, so constantly taking them is better. Or the fat soluble, they could be stored and toxicity could be risked, so it's not as delicate as that of the water soluble, but they are all very, very important. And with the daily recommended intakes, it has to be taken in the right quantities to prevent any toxicity. But deficiency in each of them has its own clinical implications. And the clinical assessment methods for the deficiencies in these micronutrients, besides whether fat soluble vitamins or water soluble vitamins, are very specific. Okay, so still on the micronutrients that are required in a balanced diet. Now with minerals, the major minerals or the macro minerals are the calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and the trace minerals are iron, zinc, selenium, and there are several more, but then they all have their clinical significance, and having low levels of them will lead to some deficiencies. Of course, iron, think of iron deficiency, anemia, and with supplementation they have guidelines that has to be followed to prevent toxicity. Hydration requirements, normally water is being taken out of balance, but it's very, very important. And with the hydration requirements, the daily fluid needs is about 3 liters, but it has a range, and depending on the gender, the age, they have their ranges. And water balance is also very important. It helps in maintaining electrolytes or homeostasis. And when it comes to clinical assessment of hydration status, whether with sunken eyes, fontanelles of newborns, and then reduced skin tegel, urine output, color of urine, all these dry mucous membranes and the rest, they all help assess the hydration status. But then when you take people like athletes, elderly in the critical care, there are special considerations where you might have to increase the fluid intake. Like for burns, you have to increase it. I'm using a Wallis rule of 9, calculating extra fluids, both with the IV hydration and that of the oral hydration. With the composition of a balanced diet, like I said, there are 6 food groupings. So the carbohydrates, the fats, proteins, the vitamins, minerals, water. So with the groupings, you can think of fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, oils, seeds, legumes, nuts, animals, food sources, whole unpolished grains, cereals, and tubers. That's part of it. And there are several guidelines when it comes to the composition of a balanced diet. So according to World Health Organization nutrient intake goals protocol, ranges of population nutrient intake goals depends on several factors. So the dietary factor and the goal being a percentage of total energy. The total fat should be 15 to 30%. That's according to WHO. And there's saturated fats among the 15 to 30 percent is less than, it should be less than 10%. Polyunsaturated should be 6 to 10%. And then and even with the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the N6 polyunsaturated fatty acids should be 5% to 8%, and the N3 polyunsaturated fatty acids should be from 1 to 2%. But the trans fats less than 1%, and monounsaturated fatty acids, um, that's by difference. But for total carbohydrate, it should be from 55 to 75%, and the free sugar should be less than 10%. For proteins, about 10 to 15%. Cholesterol should be less than 300 milligrams per day, and sodium chloride should be less than 5 grams per day, less than 2 grams per day. And for fruits and vegetables should be more than 400 grams per day, and total dietary fiber from foods too should be higher up there. So with the size serving and proportion control, size or the serving size has to do with the standard measurement of food suggested by health authorities and listed on the nutritional label, and it helps in providing a consistent reference point for nutritional information. So that's the serving size. But the proportion control, the proportion has to do with the amount of food an individual chooses to eat in just one sitting, and it may be more or less than the recommended serving size. For example, even in Ghana, there is this Ghana food-based dietary guidelines. In the US, UK, they all have their separate guidelines. So with the serving size, remember, is the standard measurement of food suggested by the health authorities and listed on the nutritional label, which helps in providing a consistent reference point for nutritional information. While the proportion is just the amount of food an individual chooses to eat in one sitting, whether it may be more or less than the recommended serving size. The nutritional pitfalls has to do with processed foods, excessive sugar, causing sugar spikes like hyperglycemic spikes and all those, and unhealthy fats too, like the trans fats and the saturated fats, high levels of them, and lack of variety in the diet. So always think of the illustrations of the balanced diet based on the standard protocols or the nutritional labels, and there are several. So most countries do have. The UK, iWorld guide, Ghana has this guide, and then US too has a separate guide too. So remember, in taking any meal, it should be a balanced diet, and should be a diet that consists of the adequate amounts of food or adequate amounts and proportions of all the required nutrients needed for healthy growth and to maintain efficient daily functions and activities.